In my view, corruption, like Justice Jackson said in the United States, it's like obscenity. It's very difficult for us to define obscenity, but we all know it when we see it. So we all know what is corrupt and what is intolerable. So once there is general agreement regarding what can be considered unacceptable conduct, whether manifest in what in the theory we call petty, blue-collar, or grand corruption, it is but a short step towards prescribing stiff and severe penalty for whoever breaks the 11th commandment. As we all know, God decreed 10 commandments to humanity. But the 11th is the most important commandment. That shall not be found out. Because if people get away with corrupt practices, they can now pontificate in a sanctimonious manner about propriety in the society. But what we have lacked, in my view, is the sense of punishment. And what has thrived, as I'm going to say later, is this notion of impunity. What can I get away with? How much can I get away with? So it's not corruption that is as much the problem as the failure of society to punish those who have been found corrupt. What do we do in Nigeria? We celebrate corrupt people. They sit on front rows in the church. I don't know, I don't go to mosque, so I don't know whether there's a sitting arrangement in mosque. Then we give them national awards. Only recently, we had the Centenary Awards, we remember. And we saw something that was reminiscent of the Rogues Gallery, where a certified roguish leader or ruler, shall I say, was numbered among the heroes. And people really wondered what has gone wrong with Nigeria. What happened to our sense of values? In such countries where honor is bestowed on both the sinner, let me say, not to talk of the saint, then you begin to wonder that the Nigerian looting class really has lost its sense of values. Now, jurists from Beccaria to Bentham had argued that it was certainty of sanction rather than severity of punishment that constitutes an effective deterrent against infraction. I'm glad Honorable Akonbi mentioned Lee Kuan Yew, because Lee Kuan Yew, I understand Nigerian ministers were giving copies of From the Third World to the First. I don't know if they have read Lee Kuan Yew. I know I gave a presentation not too long ago on moving from the third world to the first. Can Nigeria make it? We have problems because once we don't deprecate infamous conduct, then we're going to move on in circles, as it were, because we're not creating heroes for young ones that are growing. I read in the papers today that the retired Chief Justice of Nigeria, Kuchigi, who is to chair the confab, is reputed to be the poorest among our retired Chief Justices. He was said to have rejected a vehicle gift, I think from Abacha or somebody. And I heard when he was CJ that he even asked the wife not to use the phone in the house because he did not want to abuse the office that he held. So when you have somebody like that who is celebrated as an incorruptible judge, then maybe there's still some future for Nigeria. Now, the tolerance exhibited by the ruling class for the misconduct of its members and friends is clearly an affront on the corporate interests of Nigeria. Where there is selective enforcement and a high tolerance level for the misdeeds of public office holders, it becomes highly problematic to sermonize on the survival of the nation state, Nigerian nation state that is. In fact, the nation will be judged by the preparedness of the ruling class to apply the full weight of the law on all violators without fear of favor, affection, or ill will. The moment it is sounded loud and clear that in the enforcement of law there shall be no sacred cows, there is most likely to be greater compliance with the law. In Nigeria today, it is an open secret that fat camels pass through the eye of the needle. which is not only dysfunctional, but counterproductive in the extreme. I now come to the segment on ineffectiveness of efforts to curb corruption in Nigeria. Let it be immediately stated that Nigeria does not suffer from a lack of laws against corruption. We have enough laws. From the criminal code to laws establishing the anti-corruption agencies presided over by today's chairman and my fellow speaker, such as the ICPC and EFCC, as well as laws ensuring fiscal responsibility, curbing money laundering, and encouraging ethical practices in public procurement, Nigeria had established a network of laws which seem to evince formal disdain for what the late British Prime Minister Ted Heath once called, quote, the ugly and unacceptable face of capitalism. My thesis is that corruption and capitalism are partners in the enterprise. When you talk of surplus value, which investors appropriate, is extracting from the labor of the workers what they have produced that we call profit. And when we invest in companies, we expect dividends. So I'm saying that capitalism is legalized robbery. So you cannot have capitalism without its accompaniment of corruption. I'm not saying that only capitalist countries are corrupt. China, although China now, I don't know whether to call it capitalist or socialist, because when I was in China 2 years ago, definitely Shanghai did not represent or look like the type of capital. In fact, I was in Moscow 2 months ago, and Moscow was different from the Moscow that we knew as students. They have a new airport, they have Big Mac, they have Kentucky Fried Chicken, they have the American University in Moscow, and words like businessmen and all those, they are Russian words now. So you can say that corruption exists practically all over the world. But what I think singles us out is that we've not decided to either burn corrupt people at the stake, or throw them up and show them. Don't invite them to all these state functions. Don't give them awards. You shame them. But Nigerians seem to have lost the sense of shame. Now, it was a Chinese philosopher, Hu Xiang, who said that a nation is about to collapse when it has most laws. So law should not be seen as the hold-all. The more laws you pass, the more orderly society you're going to have. In fact, society is better served with fewer laws. When you have so many laws, then you have selective enforcement, and then it will be very difficult to ensure that what we want is attained. What is more, in Nigeria, we have agencies such as MAMSA, Y Brigade, NOAA, etc., which have been charged with the task of creating a new Nigerian who will do what is right and prosper and frown at undesirable conduct in public office and elsewhere. So we have institutions which were set up to fight corruption. This is aside from preachments in churches, mosques, and other places of worship aimed at winning Nigerians off untoward practices and behavior. Regrettably, all these efforts seem to have come to naught on account of insincerity and lack of tenacity of purpose by the powers that be, who flagrantly refuse to recognize that actions speak louder than precepts. The hypocrisy of the ruling class, who demonstrate double standards and inability to walk the talk, has induced long yawns among the populace, who can no longer stand the cant, hypocrisy, and sanctimonious holier-than-thou stance of their rulers, who fail egregiously to practice what they preach. So there is a dichotomy, there is a gap between what our leaders or our rulers profess and what we see in reality. Of course, a number of foreign dignitaries have been coming here to drum it into our rulers' ears that the country will be better served by building great institutions rather than encouraging big and strong personalities who could quite easily succumb to a delusion of grandeur and end up not impacting positively on the people and the country generally. However, as far as corruption is concerned, perhaps Nigeria is in need of both great leaders and effective institutions. And this is where I agree entirely with Honorable Akonbi. It's not enough to have institutions. You also need great persons to drive those institutions. We now swear by Nuhu Ribadu or Akonbi, Mustafa, because of what they did when they were running those institutions. Honorable Akonbi himself told us that since he departed, the institutions are still there. But the story, until very recently, has not been what it used to be. And people have blamed my friend Nuhu too, that he was running an outfit that was an Alsatian dog of the powers that were. But he has answered that he was doing his job as best as he knew how. And he was celebrated worldwide. Because the fear of the EFCC became the beginning of wisdom in this country. People strove not to announce their donations at public functions because they were not aware that the EFCC was not listening or watching. In the days of Nuhu Ribadu, donations were kept under wraps. The sums will not be disclosed for usually understood reasons. Now, as far as Nigeria should have these institutions, as well as great persons to drive them, as I said before. But before interrogating this thesis further, it is apposite to touch on the international ramifications of the questions on hand. And I'll come to the international dimensions of the anti-corruption crusade. Over the past 20 years or so, there seems to have been some rethinking among Western countries in particular regarding the extent that they would tolerate the salting away of corrupt earnings of especially third world leaders in their banks. You know, now we have the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act in the United States of America. We now have the Anti-Corruption Act in Britain. The OECD countries have now agreed, even Switzerland, good old Switzerland, that used to be the haven of corrupt, ill-gotten wealth. Switzerland now tries to exercise diligence on monies that are put away in their banks. The days of the numbered accounts of the Mobutus and Sese Seko and Nguema and, of course, the dictators in Africa, those days are gone because now you can't succeed in hiding away your loot, except you go to some global charters like Cayman Islands, Bermuda, Panama, or just like you have flags of convenience. There are still places where you can open accounts, unnamed accounts, where you can hide away stolen wealth from Africa. We now have laws in place against corrupt practices by functionaries of transnational corporations in the developing world. Now, in fact, it's a paradox that Africans that have committed corrupt acts go scot-free in Nigeria. I can talk for Nigeria, but they are tried in foreign countries, or they are mentioned. I can only talk of the Siemens scandal. We can talk of Kellogg scandal. We can also talk of some scandals where names were named of Nigeria, even including ministers. One of them later became head of a political party in this country, even though he had been cited in the German court. You know what I'm talking about? Everybody knows about Halliburton. Everybody knows about all these transnational corporations that had committed vile acts in Nigeria, but have not been tried for the same offense, including even the president of Nigeria, as he then was, who was mentioned as having received certain payments through a cutout, a special aid. So the laws prohibiting corrupt practice abroad will seem to have opened new vistas for the global movement against corruption, which the poorer countries could profit a great deal from. Indeed, there are a few instances where corrupt rulers who escape sanctions at home for their unconscionable acts have been brought to book abroad, even if there's not much to see yet in terms of restitution to the poorer countries following their conviction and confiscation of stolen wealth. Only last week, the United States put its hands on Abacha's loot, $400 and something million. on the next day after we gave him a special award as a hero of the centenary. I think that was a message to Nigerians that you can fool yourself, but you can't fool the rest of the world. Indeed, there are a few instances, as I said, of these people. In other words, what we now need is to repatriate such stolen funds, which will go a long way to reduce, if not in fact curb, the insatiable appetite of African rulers to gobble down their people's wealth with the connivance of accomplices from the self-same Western countries. The high point of international solidarity against corruption was the adoption of the UN Convention Against Corruption of 2006, which was followed by its African Union variant. Mercifully, Nigeria is a party to the conventions and can therefore bring its full force to bear on all those enamored of practices deprecated under those instruments. The fact needs to be emphasized that corruption is a hydra-headed monster and a global octopus which needs to be attacked globally. Trying to clip its local tentacles, while quite necessary, is regrettably insufficient to deal with the ogre. The efforts of the international community need to be galvanized against corruption, which is now approximating a crime against humanity. Thanks to people like Femi Falana. Femi Falana and Serap have approached the International Criminal Court to try corrupt Nigerian leaders for crimes against humanity, because they are depriving the Nigerian people of assets to improve their situation, and such approximate serious crimes against humanity. ICC does not accept that corruption is a crime against humanity. But I think we can continue to press to the world to see the dire situation we are in. And I'll come to my concluding remarks. Undoubtedly, corruption has become a life-threatening virus within the polity, which necessitates drastic action in order to save the patient from perdition. It is an unwarranted assault on the nation's integrity, which needs to be fought to the hilt if Nigeria is to survive. While it continues to threaten national survival, no effort should be spared to bring corruption to heel. As our people say, a drastic melee warrants a drastic remedy. Nigeria has enough laws and institutions to combat corruption. The architecture of the war against corruption seems adequate, if you ask me, even if there might be the need for retooling here and there. What has been hitherto lacking is the requisite political will to fight the disease to a logical conclusion. A situation where anti-corruption agencies are denied the wherewithal to sustain the anti-corruption crusade smacks of a calculated attempt to disempower and incapacitate them. Accordingly, what is urgently called for is rejuvenation and empowerment of existing anti-corruption agencies, as well as encouragement of all those enlisted in the struggle to contain the vermin. Those in the front line of the battle to exterminate corruption from the nation's landscape need to be sufficiently motivated so as to wage the war to a successful end. As patriotic and committed men and women, they can be trusted not to brook any act of malfeasance and untoward practice. All that is required to save this country from the corrosion of unconscionable acts is total commitment of the powers that be to the fight against corruption by way of requisite body language and the full cooperation with the agencies established to carry out the war against corruption. I thank you very much for your patience.